I've always liked driving at night. There's something mesmerizing about the empty streets, as if the city is on pause, the headlights reflecting in the puddles of water, the slight vibration of the engine and the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers create a kind of soundtrack that only those who work this shift know. That was another ordinary night. The itinerary was the same as always. The passengers' faces varied little, and the silence inside the bus almost blended with the sound of the rain hitting the roof. I already knew each stopping point, each curve on the route by heart, but that night there was something different in the air. It wasn't just the weather, it was as if the night was watching, waiting for something, and even without knowing what, I already felt that it wouldn't end as usual. The trip started smoothly. The first passengers entered the center, as always, tired people, with headphones in their ears or heads down, trying to get home without being noticed. As we advanced through the more remote neighborhoods, the bus became empty and the city became increasingly deserted. It was the last lap of the night, and I knew that after that I would return to the garage and have the much-deserved rest. Everything was calm, too calm. It was then that in the middle of a dimly lit spot he appeared. A tall man, wearing a dark coat with a hood, walked in without saying anything, without looking at me. He went straight past the validator, as if he didn't even exist, and continued to the back of the bus. I got behind the wheel again, but I couldn't help it. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw him get into the last seat on the left, close to the window. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was just another passenger, someone tired, someone who just wanted to get home. But the more I drove, the more my gaze returned to the rearview mirror. He didn't move. He didn't straighten himself up. He didn't pick up his cell phone. He didn't seem to be breathing. He just stared at the empty corridor in front of him, as if waiting for something that was about to happen. The rest of the journey continued in silence. No one else entered. Nobody else left. Just me, the sound of the rain, and him, motionless in the back of the bus. It was at that moment that I began to feel the weight of that night. A shiver ran down the back of my neck. Time seemed to slow down, and with each kilometer, the feeling that there was something very wrong there only increased. Had seen it all in my years behind the wheel, but something about that man told me that this time it wasn't just another trip. He went up in silence. The door had barely closed, and he was already walking slowly down the bus aisle with firm and heavy steps, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. The dark coat was dripping, soaked by the rain that continued outside. He didn't look at me. He didn't hesitate. He seemed to know exactly where he wanted to sit. The last seat against the window, as far away as possible from any other presence. There he settled down. He didn't adjust his backpack. He didn't wipe his wet hands. He didn't move more than necessary. He just stared at the emptiness in front of him, as if the scene he was observing was much more interesting or dangerous than anything that was happening on that bus. The feeling was as if he wasn't just waiting for the trip to end, but rather waiting for something or someone. The rain ran down. The glass, but he didn't care. He stood there, motionless, staring at the hallway with a look that I couldn't see, but I could feel. The reflection of the bus interior in the windows made it seem like there was something else inside, as if shadows were moving subtly around it. Every now and then, I looked in the rearview mirror. I tried to pretend that I was just an ordinary passenger, but every time my eyes crossed that corner of the bus, I felt a kind of discomfort that I couldn't explain. The kind of discomfort that doesn't come from outside, but from within. A silent warning your body gives, even when your mind tries to rationalize. And the strangest thing, even without hearing any sound, even with the bus empty, I couldn't get rid of the impression that he wasn't alone on that bench. Time didn't seem to pass. The road continued, but the journey seemed stuck in a loop. The man was still there, motionless, Not even the vibration of the curves made him move. The lights inside flickered from time to time, flickering slightly, as if responding to some invisible presence. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but at certain moments, the glass behind him seemed to fog up more than usual, as if a hidden breath was condensing there. My chest started to tighten. Driving was my comfort zone, but now every kilometer made me more restless. There was something about that figure that was completely out of touch with the rest of the world, as if he were not part of the urban landscape, but something that came from outside, or from within the darkness itself. The journey continued in silence. Each stop seemed to drag time, and the few remaining passengers got off one by one, oblivious to the heavy atmosphere that filled the environment. It was as if the sound of rain drowned out any conversation, as if even the usual whisperers were afraid to speak out that night. I looked down the aisle and saw the seats becoming empty, the windows becoming wet mirrors that reflected my anxiety when I realized only him was left. The man on the last bench, the one who never moved, the one that seemed fused to the seat like part of the bus structure. My heart beat faster. It wasn't fear yet, it was restlessness. Something about that constant and silent presence stirred the senses, as if reality were out of whack, even though everything around seemed exactly the same. At some point, I lost track of time. The road that I once knew by heart began to look different. The streetlights seemed farther away, and the headlights reflected less off the asphalt. I continued driving, keeping my focus on the rearview mirror. There he was, property, and that scared me more than if he had made any move. Not a turn of the head, not an adjustment of posture. It was as if time didn't touch him, and yet every second that passed made his presence heavier. I blinked quickly, trying to break that suffocating feeling, but it was useless. Something told me he was there for a reason, that trip had a different purpose. When I finally reached the end point, I took a deep breath. I was ready to turn around and tell him he needed to get down. But then I noticed something strange. I looked in the mirror again. The bench was in the same place. Light flickered faintly in the background, but he wasn't there anymore. My vision froze for an instant. I didn't hear any footsteps, nor did I feel the door open. It was as if he had evaporated in time between one blink and the next. I stood up slowly, with a knot in my stomach. I walked to the back of the bus with slow steps, and every creak of the floor sounded like a desperate whisper. When I arrived at the last bench, there was no one there, but the seat was still wet. Not from rain, but as if someone had been sitting there until a few seconds ago. I touched my hand and felt the cold. It wasn't just physical. It was a cold that came from within, a deep chill that told me, without words, that it wasn't over yet, that he was still there somehow, observing, waiting. I stood up slowly, my body feeling heavier than normal. The engine still made a slight noise in the background, but it seemed distant, as if time was deadened. I walked down the empty corridor, my footsteps echoing strangely inside the bus. With each step, my heart beat faster. There was no one. Everyone had gone down, everyone except him. And now, he was gone too. When I reached the bottom, the air felt different. More cold. The lighting was dim, almost non-existent in that corner. I looked at the seat, hoping to see nothing, but what I found was worse. The seat was completely soaked. Water ran down the edges, as if someone had just gotten up, leaving behind more than just marks. I approached carefully, not knowing exactly what I was expecting to find. I touched the bank. It was freezing, much more than it should. The feeling of the cold water on my fingertips was like a shock, not just physical, but emotional. Something told me that it wasn't just rain. There were no leaks on the roof, nor were the windows open, and the most disturbing thing, the ground around it was dry. There were no footprints, no signs of recent movement, as if whoever was there had simply ceased to exist, or worse, as if it never really was. A dense emptiness seemed to emanate from that corner, a silence that became unbearable. It wasn't the usual kind of early morning silence. It was the kind of silence that weighs heavily, that whispers without saying anything. I stood still for a few seconds, staring at that wet bench as if it could give me any answers. But all I got was the rain outside, which was now beating harder against the windows, as if it was trying to invade the inside of the bus. My eyes swept every inch of the hallway, trying to find any sign, any clue that would help me understand what had happened. But there was nothing, no shadows, no reflection, no explanation. I went back to the cabin. But the atmosphere didn't return to normal. Something had changed. The feeling of presence did not go away. On the contrary, she seemed closer, more intimate, as if it, whatever it was, hadn't left, as if he had decided to stay. And at that moment, I understood. I wasn't the one watching. I was the one being watched. I returned to the cabin with my hands still shaking. The rain drummed on the ceiling as if it wanted to warn me of something. I sat in the driver's seat and, with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, accessed the security camera monitor. The grainy image appeared before me, and I began to rewind to the beginning of the trip. I saw the first passengers entering one by one. I saw rapid conversations, people distracted by their cell phones, others just in silence, until he appeared. The man in the dark coat. He calmly went up to the front door, went straight through without looking at anyone, and headed towards the back, exactly as I remembered. He stopped at the last bench, sat down, and then just stayed there, fixed, solid, property. I continued watching. I fast-forwarded the video, watching the tired faces of the other passengers as they descended, point after point. I saw them all leaving one by one, each body getting up, walking down the hall and out the back door. The scene continued like a ritual repeated daily, people coming and going about their routines. But he didn't move. It stayed there, like a forgotten piece in the hour. Background. I advanced further. I reached the final point, the moment I parked and got up. And even there, in the images, you could clearly see the bank was still occupied. The figure still remained there, as if the camera was also afraid to show what would happen next. But then out of nowhere, the bank appears empty. I rewound the video several times. I watched it in slow motion, frame by frame. But there was no cut, no sudden transitions. In no time he stood up. In no frame did he walk down the hallway. It didn't come down. It didn't disappear slowly. It simply stopped being there, as if it had never existed. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what it felt like. The wet bench was still there. The cold was still present. The feeling of presence still surrounded me. It was as if the security system had not failed, but had chosen not to show the truth. That figure, that man, was not just another passenger. It was a fragment of something that logic could not explain. And now, even in the face of the silent evidence of the cameras, the only thing left was fear. Since that night, driving has never been the same. The city remains the same, the routes too, but I changed. Something in me was stuck on that wet bench, in that inexplicable absence. There are nights when the bus is completely empty, but I hear footsteps behind me. Light, rhythmic, as if someone is walking toward the back. I look in the rearview mirror and see nothing. I stop, turn my face away. The hallway is empty, but the sound continues, echoing like a memory that insists on not being forgotten. And then, when everything seems calm, I look again and see a shadow, a silhouette too subtle to be real, but too present to be an illusion. It's always at the same point, that unlit stop where the man climbed. It doesn't matter the time, the weather, or the number of passengers. When the bus stops there, I feel it, a weight changes the air. The temperature drops discreetly. The dashboard light appears to flicker. And even if no one climbs in, the sound of the door opening is always accompanied by a dull click at the bottom of the vehicle. The last bench, wet, as if someone had just sat down. I never see who you are. I never hear any voice, but I know it's there. The presence is undeniable, like an invisible guest who doesn't want to be noticed but also doesn't want to leave. The kind of thing you feel in your bones, not your eyes. Some would say it's imagination, that I'm tired, which is just the accumulation of long mornings and loneliness behind the wheel. Maybe it really is, but something inside me insists otherwise. I'm not alone. I've never been since that night. And every time I get back behind the wheel, every time I cross that point and hear the door open, I know I'm transporting more than people. I take with me something that does not belong to this world, something that refuses to go down. Who chose that bank? Who chose me? Maybe he never left. Maybe he's just waiting. And the scariest thing, maybe this time he's waiting for you.